You're a newlywed. You've just returned to your tribe after a long, brutal winter of hunting, with frost still clinging to your boots. The yurts are warm, the mares are foaling, and tonight should be yours, your first night with your new wife. Except, it isn't. Because she's not waiting for you. She's lying with a guest, a man you barely know. And the rest of the camp? They're celebrating. Welcome to the ancient Mongol steppe, where hospitality ran deeper than blood, and sometimes a man's greatest honor was to offer his wife, not his sword, to a stranger. Yes, you heard that right. For centuries, among certain Mongolic tribes, it was customary, even sacred, to offer your wife to a guest for the night, not as a sign of weakness, not as exploitation, but as the highest form of generosity and alliance. It wasn't just about warmth or pleasure. It was about sealing trust, about binding souls through flesh. This tradition, sometimes called Otgun Kuni Kishig, loosely, the blessing of the lastborn, wasn't whispered or hidden. It was expected, celebrated, taught from boyhood. Imagine a wedding where, instead of the groom undressing the bride, she is escorted to another man's yurt as a ritual of union, a test of loyalty, of submission, of collective ownership. The groom, in return, receives not jealousy, but status. And the wives? They were trained for this, not just in seduction, but in control. A proper Mongol bride knew how to please a stranger without shame. Her body was not just hers or her husband's. It was, quite literally, part of the tribe's diplomatic toolkit. If she cried or resisted, the shame fell on her family. But if she made the guest return glowing with gratitude, her name would be sung by the fire. There's one account, from the writings of a Tang-era emissary who visited a nomadic chieftain near the Orkhon Valley, describing a celebration where 3 brides were offered to a single guest, their hair perfumed with fermented mare's milk, their hands bound with goat sinew, so they would not cling out of affection. The purpose? To ensure the guest felt like a king, but also to ensure the guest owed his soul to the host. You might be wondering, didn't this create confusion, jealousy, children born from other men? We'll get to that. But for now, just picture the psychological weight. Being a groom, watching your bride walk into another man's arms, and knowing it's your duty to smile. Some modern scholars argue this wasn't purely about sex, that it symbolized the tribe's belief in communal honor, that to isolate love, to hoard a woman's body, was seen as selfishness, not strength. Others disagree, pointing to darker interpretations, that such rituals disguised powerlessness with poetry, that some women were nothing more than tokens traded for security. And yet, the tradition persisted, not just in legends, but in documented practices stretching from the Altai Mountains to the fringes of the Gobi. In some clans, even Genghis Khan's ancestors were said to have participated in these rites, though no official court chronicle confirms it. But here's what makes it even stranger. These offerings weren't only made to noble guests or envoys. Sometimes, even wandering monks or defeated enemies were granted a night in a chief's tent, with his wife beside them. Mercy wrapped in skin, defeat dressed as pleasure. This was the logic of the steppe. Your body may fall, your horse may bleed, but your home must never lose its hospitality. And so, as the fire crackled and the horses shifted under the stars, the man who just married slept alone. While the stranger, full of meat, wine, and foreign intentions, reached for the woman in silks. And she closed her eyes, knowing the tribe was listening. Because in this culture, shame wasn't found in the act. It was found in refusing to perform it beautifully. But the night ends, the guest departs, and the wife returns, and the real questions begin. Is she still your wife? Is the child she may bear yours? Or does it even matter, when lineage and loyalty are measured not by blood, but by how many nights your tent could light for another? Next, we'll step deeper into the laws that made this practice more than tradition. We'll ask, was this freedom or a performance of bondage? It wasn't just a custom, it was written into the bones of the tribe, passed down like saddlecraft and fire starting, the unspoken law of wife gifting. Among the Mongol nomads, hospitality wasn't just extended through food or shelter, it was a full-body offering, and the law didn't ask your opinion, it demanded your obedience. If a guest rode into camp, especially one of status, age, or sacred purpose, the host's wife was expected to be part of the welcome, not reluctantly, not shamefully, but with all the elegance of a queen greeting her equal. She would pour the arag, she would smile, and when night fell, she would walk to the guest's yurt, barefoot on cold grass, head unbowed. Because she wasn't being traded, she was fulfilling a right, a contract of skin and reputation. What's strange is how codified this was. In some clans, women were trained from girlhood for these exact nights, not just in dance or words, but in how to read a man's rank, his scent, his silences. A guest of high spirit must be touched first on the brow. A guest of sorrow must be undressed with eyes lowered. These weren't flirtations, they were protocols. You could break a treaty by offering your wife the wrong way. There's an old tale still told around campfires near the Khangai Mountains. A warrior named Suk, freshly married, refused to let his wife be offered to a wandering shaman who'd saved his brother from frostbite. He locked her inside the felt walls. The next morning, the shaman vanished, but so did the rains. For 3 years, the valley dried, animals died, and eventually, Suk was banished not for blasphemy, but for selfishness. The lesson? Even the skies punish a man who hoards what should be shared. Of course, not everyone accepted this law as noble. One Chinese envoy described it in his scrolls as the laughing chains of the steppe, marveling at how women smiled while being passed from tent to tent, as if their pain had been boiled out of them and replaced with ceremony. But what he didn't understand was this. To a Mongol woman, the ritual wasn't about submission. It was about power disguised as grace. Because within the law, there were whispers. If a woman charmed the guest too well, the guest might offer gifts, horses, silk, even alliances. If she pleased a visiting prince, her son might be adopted into his clan. And in a world where men held bows and led raids, women held something even more dangerous, the ability to rewrite bloodlines through the quiet fire of one night. Yet, not all women agreed. In the records of the Ilkhanate, one widow named Altanshimeg refused to continue the practice after her husband died. She turned away 3 guests. By the 4th, they came not with gifts, but with ropes. She was tied, shamed, and sent to the horses, not for refusing sex, but for insulting the system. Her tent was burned, her name was cursed, and yet, in secret, younger women began to copy her. She became a ghost of rebellion. Even so, the majority obeyed. Because disobedience didn't just cost reputation, it could cost protection. In a tribe where survival depended on unity, a woman who broke the chain endangered the whole. And so the system continued. Elegant, brutal, erotic, sacred. Think about it. What does it mean when law wraps itself in pleasure? When tradition and intimacy become indistinguishable? Some call it freedom, a kind of sensual communism. Others call it slavery beneath silk. And what of the husbands? Many claimed pride. But inside, jealousy fermented like spoiled milk. Some would sneak to the guest's yurt to listen, breath caught in their throat, fists clenched in the dark. One famous chieftain, Erdene the Blue-Handed, was said to have murdered a guest who cried out his wife's name during climax. The punishment? not exile, just a lesser bride and fewer sons. So was this honor? Was this bondage? Or was it something stranger? A ritual built on the illusion that offering a woman makes you powerful, when in truth, it simply shows who truly owns her. They say in the Mongolian steppe, a man doesn't own his land, his horse, or even his name. He only borrows them from the winds. But his wife and her child, that should be his, right? Not quite. By the 3rd or 4th year of her marriage, a woman might carry a child whose eyes slanted differently, whose skin tone whispered of southern suns, whose cheekbones echoed a traveler's forgotten face. And yet no one asked, no one accused. The tribe would simply say, "The wind brings many fathers." Why? Because questioning lineage wasn't just taboo, it was heresy. In a system where wives were shared and guests were gods in disguise, the idea of blood purity was almost irrelevant. What mattered was strength, fate, and the ability to ride by age 4. In fact, some clans encouraged this ambiguity. Among the Kori tombed, a woman would keep a wooden plaque inside her ger, with notches carved for every man she had welcomed during the honored guest cycle, not to shame her, but to calculate the power of her womb. The more notches, the more divine her fertility. If her child thrived, it was because her choices had pleased the spirits. One carved story panel found in a ruined shrine near Uve's Lake shows a woman surrounded by 3 men, one in armor, one in priest's robes, and one wearing only wind symbols. The child in her arms bears features of all 3. Below them, an inscription that roughly translates to, "Let the strongest memory win." It gets stranger. In some lineages, the supposed father had no say in the child's fate. If the baby showed signs of divine origin, such as being born during an eclipse, or with a sun vein on its temple, it might be taken by the elders, raised communally, and renamed under the guest's totem. That guest may have ridden off years ago, never to return. But his essence, they believed, had left a seed worth cultivating. And the mother? She would neither protest nor weep. In one account from a Persian trader in the 1300s, a woman named Sholboy gave birth to a boy with green eyes, the same as a Turkish horseman who'd passed through 9 moons earlier. The boy was sent to train with the shamans, while Sholboy was gifted 2 camels and a hawk. She was seen smiling that day, not for joy, but for survival. Because the gift meant status, the child meant leverage. But this wasn't just spiritual, it was tactical. In a land with no borders, no DNA tests, and no state, bloodlines were fluid by necessity. If your wife birthed a strong son with the jaw of a visiting Khan, that boy might someday forge an alliance, or avoid a war. In the Mongol mind, family wasn't a question of biology, it was a map of influence, and every mysterious child was a possible bridge between worlds. Of course, some men didn't take it so lightly. Old poems speak of warriors who took their own lives after their sons called another man father. One chilling folktale tells of a husband who left his newborn in the snow, whispering, "Return when you know whose blood you carry." The child, they say, grew up with wolves, and later led a raiding band that killed his unknown sire. But these were cautionary tales. Most chose silence over scandal. To accuse a woman was to insult her guest, and to insult a guest was to risk divine retaliation. So husbands would nod, smile, raise the child, pretend. Because in the end, raising a child, even one born of another man, was safer than starting a feud. Bloodshed was expensive, but ambiguity? Ambiguity was free. Still, a question lingers. When fatherhood is a suggestion and motherhood is a contract, who truly owns the child? In the final chapter, we'll see how far this belief system went. Because in certain sacred rituals, a wife didn't just serve men, she became something more, something untouchable and terrifying. When a woman stops being a wife and becomes a symbol of the divine. By now, you've seen the practice. A wife offered to a guest, a child born under a borrowed name, a silence that masquerades as tradition. But what happens when a woman stops being just a vessel and becomes a symbol? Not a wife, not even a lover, but a living charm, a breathing shrine, a relic made of skin. Among certain nomadic clans, especially those who traced their bloodlines to Genghis Khan himself, there were women who were no longer touched, not because of age or illness, but because they had crossed the threshold. That's what the elders called it, Yekin Tsonk, the sacred window. These were women who had served so many powerful men, birthed so many children tied to alliances, that their bodies were no longer private. They were public mythology. In some camps, they were dressed entirely in white felt and forbidden to speak unless summoned. They sat in a separate tent during ceremonies, their feet never touching bare earth. Why? Because it was said they contained too many souls, and walking freely might disturb the balance of the wind spirits. One account from a Qing-era soldier describes a woman known only as Tsagan Ije, the White Mother. She hadn't spoken in 17 years. Her tent was placed in the center of a war council, not because she gave advice, but because warriors believed the smell of her breath, still rich with the memory of powerful men, would summon victory. They'd light incense beneath her cot. They'd offer goat fat on her behalf. One soldier wrote, "She does not move, but she is more feared than the chief." And it wasn't just symbolism. These women were guarded, watched, protected, not for their safety, but for preservation. Touching them outside of ritual was punishable by exile, in some cases, by death, because by that point, they were no longer individuals. They were believed to carry the scent of kings, the womb of thunder, or worse, the mouth of prophecy. One chilling tale speaks of a woman named Erkatu, who served as guest wife for 9 summers and 9 winters. After her final child, the shamans declared her sealed. She could no longer be touched, not even by her husband. Her food was served through a wooden slit in her tent. Her body was oiled with yak butter by blind girls, so they could not witness her form. And when she died, they burned her on a floating raft, not for cremation, but to return her, unmarked, to the sky. Archaeological digs near the Orkhon Valley unearthed a burial with 3 layers of tent cloth, a silver ring marked with 6 guest clan symbols, and bones showing no sign of trauma, childbirth, or disease. Some say it was a Sakilgan Emegte, a vow-bound woman, a living monument. So, why go this far? Because in a world ruled by storms, spirits, and swordplay, control over life meant everything. And what greater control than owning the source of life itself, not as a person, but as an idea, a charm, a totem, an eternal witness to desire, war, and legacy. It's easy to laugh now, easy to call it barbaric. But before you judge, ask yourself, how different is it from today's icons? The women whose bodies we no longer see as human, but as status. Whose faces we plaster on buildings, brands, altars of power. The only difference is, the Mongols didn't pretend. They called it what it was, transformation through surrender. The elevation of a woman through complete obliteration of her choice. A gift to the tribe, a cost no one refunded. And maybe that's the most terrifying thing about it. Not the rituals, not the silence, but how holy it all felt.